During an international military ceremony, Toru sat beside Captain Benjamin Miller. Both relaxed, exchanging arrogant smiles as officers from other nations filled the hall. Aaron approached their table with controlled steps and rendered a precise salute. Before her hand lowered, Toru snapped at her in Japanese, loud enough to draw glances. He mocked her posture, calling her a clumsy pig, certain she would not understand. Aaron felt her jaw tighten, but her voice remained steady. In flawless Japanese, she replied, "I understood everything you said. Every single word." Toru froze, color draining from his face as the laughter vanished. In that instant, Aaron made a silent decision. During his 3 months in the United States, she would respond carefully, and she knew Benjamin, who had watched her humiliation before, would not be spared. If you want to see what she did next, make sure you're subscribed. Now, let's go back to where this truly began.
The reception hall at Naval Base Coronado had been arranged with deliberate symmetry. The flags of the United States and Japan stood aligned at equal height behind the head table, their fabric motionless in the controlled air of the room. Silverware reflected the overhead chandeliers in precise lines. Every place card had been measured to the inch. Naval Special Warfare understood ceremony as another form of discipline. Commander Aaron Williams stood near the center aisle in service dress whites. The gold-sealed trident above her ribbons caught the light without ornament. 19 years of service rested in the stillness of her posture. Multiple deployments, combat rotations, operational billets that did not require introduction. Her shoulders were squared, but not rigid, hands relaxed at her sides. Breathing measured through the diaphragm, slow enough to steady pulse rate without visible effort. Across the room, Captain Benjamin Miller, commanding officer of the NESW group overseeing the exchange, maintained a controlled smile as he spoke with Captain Toru Honda of the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force. Their conversation was framed by staff officers and liaison personnel who observed without interrupting. The exchange program had been coordinated through formal channels, BACLT oversight, approved itineraries, structured professional observation. Optics mattered. When Aaron approached the head table, her heels made a muted contact against the polished floor. She halted at the prescribed distance. Her salute was crisp, forearm parallel, fingers aligned. Miller returned it. Honda inclined his head a fraction slower, eyes shifting first to her insignia before meeting her gaze. There was a pause long enough to register. Honda spoke in rapid Japanese. His tone was conversational on the surface, but the cadence carried edge. The phrasing was informal and proper for rank equivalence. The words referenced novelty, implied accommodation, questioned suitability without naming it directly. His right eyebrow lifted a millimeter at the final clause. The corner of his mouth tightened, almost imperceptibly. He assumed she would not understand. Aaron did not blink. The only movement was the subtle expansion of her ribcage as she drew in a controlled breath. Her jaw set for half a second, then released. When she responded, her Japanese was fluent, measured, grammatically exact, delivered at a tempo that matched his own. "I understood every word, Captain." Her pronunciation carried no hesitation, no accent thick enough to dismiss. The honorific was precise. The correction was contained within protocol. Silence pressed into the space between them. The ambient murmur of the reception continued at the periphery, but those closest to the head table registered the shift. Miller's smile faltered, not visibly enough to be called reaction, but his fingers curled slightly against the stem of his glass before relaxing again. Honda's expression changed in increments. The calculation replaced assumption. His shoulders remained squared, but the muscles along his jaw flexed once before settling. He inclined his head, this time with formality restored. Aaron maintained bearing. No escalation. No deviation from decorum. She requested permission to be dismissed, voice steady, volume appropriate for ceremonial setting. "Permission to be dismissed, sir." Miller granted it after the briefest delay. She executed a precise facing movement and stepped away from the head table. Her stride neither hurried nor slowed. Each step remained even, heel to toe, as she re-entered the flow of officers and guests. No one addressed the exchange directly. No one needed to. At the edge of the hall, Erin allowed one controlled exhale through her nose. Her pulse had elevated barely, but she registered it the way she registered wind direction before a breach. Information, not emotion. Documentation mattered. Later that evening in her office, the overhead fluorescent light hummed softly above her desk. Her dress coat hung neatly on the back of the chair. She sat upright as she accessed the base Equal Opportunity Reporting portal through secure login. The language of the report was factual. Date, time, location, verbatim statements as accurately as memory permitted. No adjectives, no inference, just record. Her fingers paused once above the keyboard before completing the final sentence. She reviewed the entry twice for precision, ensuring alignment with DOEO reporting standards. Then she submitted it through official channels. There was no visible reaction after the confirmation screen appeared. She closed the browser, powered down the terminal, and remained seated for several seconds, hands resting flat against the desk surface. In uniform, absence of documentation equated to absence of occurrence. The reception would be remembered as successful, diplomatic, structured. The record would reflect the rest. Erin did not request a meeting. She did not initiate discussion in corridors or linger outside offices. The reception remained where it belonged, documented, filed, contained within process. Her focus shifted to the training calendar projected on the secure operations screen inside the Naval Special Warfare Administrative Building. The upcoming Joint Exchange Block included a voluntary close-quarters battle qualification for operational officers maintaining NSW standards. The block was clearly annotated, Live Fire Evolution. Certified range safety officers, medical support on standby in accordance with NAVD operational directives. Participation required current physical readiness certification, weapons qualification currency, and documented operational status. Erin stood at the conference table, sleeves of her service khaki blouse precisely aligned at the wrist. A pen rested parallel to the edge of her folder. Her eyes moved methodically down the schedule grid dates, instructor assignments, safety oversight designations. No deviation from standard training cycle. No accommodation language inserted for diplomatic purposes. Across the table, Commander Sarah Chun reviewed the same schedule. Chun's expression remained neutral, but her index finger tapped once against the margin when she reached the CQB entry. A subtle pause. Then stillness. "Voluntary," Chun said evenly, confirming what was already printed. "Yes, ma'am," Erin replied. Maintaining NSU-EVU operational standards. There was no inflection suggesting invitation or challenge. Later that week, during a structured coordination briefing attended by both commands, Captain Toru Honda expressed interest in observing the qualification. His tone was formal, translated through established liaison protocol when necessary, though his English required little assistance. His posture was upright, hands loosely clasped behind his back. Observation was well within parameters. A few seconds after the acknowledgement was recorded, Honda added that he would prefer to participate for integration purposes. The phrase landed without reaction on most faces in the room. Erin's pen continued its steady notation across the margin of her folder. Only the faint tightening along her jaw suggested internal recalibration. Participation in an NSWCQB qualification was not ceremonial. It required adherence to standards that did not flex for rank equivalence or diplomatic optics. Commander Chun did not respond immediately. She shifted her weight slightly, then turned a single page in her binder with deliberate calm. Participation would require formal acknowledgement and compliance with all prerequisites, she stated. Honda inclined his head once. Understood. Captain Benjamin Miller, seated near the head of the table, offered a measured nod. His expression carried a faint crease between his brows that had not been present earlier. His fingers pressed lightly against the tabletop, then relaxed. Administrative procedure moved forward. Chun ensured the request was documented in writing. Eligibility verification was initiated through standard channels: medical clearance confirmation, weapons qualification records, operational currency review. The CQB evolution would be conducted by certified instructors whose reporting chain did not fall under Captain Miller's direct authority. Range control oversight was confirmed. A designated range safety officer and medical corpsman assignment were logged in accordance with safety protocols. Erin reviewed the finalized training roster once it was redistributed. Her name appeared among operational officers maintaining quarterly qualification compliance. Honda's name appeared below, annotated as visiting participant, voluntary. She did not look toward Miller during the next staff exchange. She did not look toward Honda. Her focus remained on the printed prerequisites. No modifications were made to accommodate rank. No exceptions were granted in anticipation of outcome. On the morning of the final coordination meeting before the qualification, Chun addressed the assembled officers with clipped precision. Standards apply equally. Certified evaluators, independent scoring, documentation retained. Her gaze moved across the room without settling. Miller's jaw shifted once, a brief tightening before smoothing into composure. Honda's expression remained controlled, though his thumb pressed faintly against the inside of his palm, a small, contained motion. Erin closed her folder. The sound was soft, but definitive. Professional positioning required no raised voices, no public correction, only structure. The CQB qualification remained what it had always been, a measure of performance against established operational benchmarks, nothing more, nothing less. The kill house at Coronado stood silent in the gray light before sunrise. The concrete exterior held the night's coolness, absorbing the faint glow that edged the Pacific horizon beyond the base perimeter. Inside, the air carried the sterile scent of lubricant and carbon residue. Overhead lighting cast sharp angles across plywood walls configured into hallways, corners, and threshold points. Live fire certification followed protocol without exception. Before entry, each participant's documentation had been verified: current medical clearance signed by authorized medical personnel, confirmation of active operational status, quarterly qualification compliance logged in training records. The range safety brief was delivered in a measured cadence. Muzzle awareness, triggered discipline, positive identification of targets, adherence to the established course of fire. A designated range safety officer stood positioned with unobstructed visual access. A corpsman remained staged outside the structure in accordance with risk mitigation requirements. Captain Toru Honda's paperwork met minimum administrative requirements. The signatures were valid. The dates fell within acceptable windows. What the file did not reflect was repetition at naval special warfare tempo, accumulated refinement that came only through sustained operational cycles. Commander Erin Williams conducted her pre-entry checks without flourish. Eye and ear protection secured, plate carrier adjusted, primary weapon inspected, chamber clear, then loaded under supervision. She performed a press check, confirming round status. Her breathing settled into a steady rhythm, diaphragm expanding evenly beneath body armor. At the start signal, she crossed the threshold. Her first corner was taken tight, muzzle indexed precisely along the line of sight. Target acquisition was immediate. 2 rounds center mass, controlled pair, transition left. slice the pie. No overexposure beyond the fatal funnel. Her foot placement was deliberate, heel lifted, weight distributed to minimize noise without sacrificing speed. A hostile silhouette appeared partially obscured behind a barrier. She adjusted angle by inches, isolating the target zone. 2 rounds, neutralized. No collateral strike on adjacent non-threat indicator. Her movements were economical, no wasted motion. The weapon tracked naturally with her gaze. Shoulders remained stable during recoil impulse. Magazine change executed behind simulated cover release. Insert, tap, rack without breaking visual discipline on the next entry point. A hostage scenario presented midway through the course. One hostile silhouette positioned near a no-shoot target. Erin's pace did not falter. She shifted laterally, creating a clean sight picture. Single round, cranial vault. The no-shoot remained untouched. The final room required rapid discrimination, multiple targets at varying depths. She engaged in sequence, prioritizing immediate threats. Controlled breathing, sight alignment. Trigger press smooth and uninterrupted. When she exited, the range safety officer raised a hand, signaling clear. She engaged safety, finger indexed straight along the frame. The timer was read aloud, 44 seconds. All targets neutralized, no safety violations, no procedural corrections. Erin removed her eye protection. There was no outward display of exertion. A thin line of perspiration traced beneath her collar, absorbed into fabric. She nodded once to the evaluators and stepped aside. Captain Honda prepared next. He mirrored the safety checks with careful attention. His grip was technically correct. His stance aligned with conventional doctrine. When the start signal sounded, he entered with controlled pace. His first engagement was accurate, but fractionally delayed. A half-second pause before firing, as though confirming what instinct might have resolved faster. 2 rounds landed center mass, clean. In the second corridor, his footwork shifted wider than necessary, creating additional exposure along the threshold. He corrected mid-step. The adjustment was small, but visible. At the hostage scenario, he hesitated. The hostile silhouette was partially masked by the no-shoot target. Honda adjusted position once. Then again. His front sight hovered for a fraction too long before he fired. The shot neutralized the hostile, but the delay registered on the timer. His transitions between targets lacked fluidity. The muzzle dipped slightly during a directional shift before recovering alignment. Reaction time lagged by increments that did not constitute failure, but did not meet NSW integration standards. He completed the course without safety violation. All hostile targets were engaged. The final time was recorded without commentary. When he exited, his jaw tightened briefly before smoothing into composure. He removed his eye protection with deliberate care, avoiding unnecessary motion. The evaluators conferred quietly, clipboards angled away from participants. Their annotations were clinical. Remedial training recommended for NSW integration standards. The phrasing was precise. No reference to rank, no embellishment, no comparative language. The documentation would be filed in accordance with training oversight procedures. Not failure, not humiliation. An assessment aligned to standard. Erin observed without expression. Her breathing had already returned to baseline. Honda stood with shoulders squared, eyes forward, absorbing the outcome without visible protest. In naval special warfare, performance was recorded in ink, and ink carried weight. 2 weeks after the qualification, the convoy moved east under a pale California sky. The training site lay beyond the coastal humidity of Coronado, where the desert flattened into wide expanses of dust and heat shimmer. The joint humanitarian exercise had been formally approved by Public Affairs and authorized through command channels under the oversight of United States Pacific Fleet. The paperwork bore the appropriate routing endorsements. Risk assessments were signed. Media engagement guidelines were attached as annex. A temporary operations center had been erected from modular shelters and canvas structures reinforced against desert wind. A field medical station stood at the center of the layout, marked by a Red Cross panel visible from elevated terrain. Simulated refugee tents extended in rows beyond it, each tagged with identification numbers for scenario tracking. Water bladders and supply pallets were staged according to the logistics plan. An embedded journalist accompanied the event, credentialed through official channels. His press badge was verified upon arrival. He wore protective eyewear and remained within designated boundaries, escorted by a public affairs officer at all times. The POA carried a clipboard and a radio handset, maintaining constant situational awareness of where the journalist stood and what he observed. There were no deviations from media protocol, no surprise access points, no closed-door briefings hidden from record. Captain Benjamin Miller oversaw the operation from the command post, sleeves rolled precisely to regulation length. A digital tablet displayed real-time updates of scenario injects. Captain Toru Honda stood nearby as an observing participant, hands clasped behind his back, uniform immaculate despite the rising dust. Commander Aaron Williams moved between functional areas, confirming readiness states. She inspected triage tags at the medical station, verifying that simulated casualty categories were properly color-coded, immediate, delayed, minimal. She checked water distribution logs against expected consumption rates. Her communication with team leads was concise, her voice even against the hum of generators. The scenario began with controlled escalation. A surge of simulated refugees approached the intake perimeter, volunteers acting under scripted distress parameters. Medical staff initiated triage under timed conditions. Logistics personnel began distributing supplies according to the manifest. Heat intensified by late morning. The desert wind shifted, carrying grit into open containers. A supply truck assigned to deliver additional water purification units reported a delay through the operations net. Inside the command post, a logistics officer briefed the shortfall to Captain Miller. The officer's voice remained steady, but his fingers pressed hard enough against the edge of the table to whiten the knuckles. Miller's jaw tightened. Oh, a thin muscle along his cheek flickered once. He asked for updated arrival times. The answer was uncertain estimated, not confirmed. His response sharpened. Questions came faster. Why had redundancy not been staged? Why was secondary routing not activated? The junior officer absorbed the words without raising his eyes. A bead of sweat traced down from his temple to his collar. Outside, the intake line lengthened. Simulated patients presented dehydration markers, dry lips, unsteady posture, scripted confusion. The corpsmen followed protocol, but the gap in supply coordination forced ration recalculation. Then a new inject was transmitted. Simulated casualty collapse within the triage zone. The medical lead requested immediate direction regarding evacuation prioritization. Inside the command post, Miller looked toward his staff. For a fraction of a second, his gaze shifted from one officer to another, as if measuring consensus. His fingers hovered above the tablet screen before making contact. He asked for confirmation of resource allocation percentages already briefed earlier that morning. The delay was brief, but measurable. Commander Sarah Chone's voice came through the operations net, directing that immediate triage authority be executed in accordance with pre-briefed contingency plans. Erin stepped forward only after hearing the directive. She did not interrupt. She did not override. She acknowledged the order and moved. At the triage zone, she knelt beside the simulated casualty, assessing airway positioning and responsiveness in accordance with training protocol. She directed personnel to redistribute medical assets from minimal category to immediate, citing contingency clause from the operations plan. Her tone remained level. Her gestures were precise, 2 fingers indicating repositioning, a flat palm signaling hold. She reassigned water units from administrative reserve to intake, adjusting distribution ratios without verbal escalation. The supply manifest was updated in her handwriting, numbers corrected with clean strokes. The intake line stabilized. Within minutes, the simulated casualty was processed according to scenario parameters. Evacuation route confirmed, documentation completed. From the periphery, the journalist observed. His camera remained steady. The POI stood half a step behind him, eyes scanning both the scene and the boundaries of authorized access. Captain Honda watched the exchange without comment. His expression was composed, though his lower lip pressed faintly inward before relaxing. Captain Miller exited the command post moments later, shoulders squared, expression neutralized into formal oversight. The remainder of the exercise proceeded without further disruption. The supply truck arrived, distribution normalized. Scenario injects concluded on schedule. The journalist lowered his camera only after the final briefing concluded. He recorded statements within approved parameters. No commentary was offered beyond observable action. What had unfolded required no embellishment. The desert wind continued to move across the site, lifting fine dust along the perimeter of the temporary camp. Erin removed her gloves, flexing her fingers once before placing them neatly into a cargo pocket. The exercise had remained within doctrine. Performance had been visible. Nothing more, nothing less. 3 days after the desert exercise concluded, the notification arrived through official channels. The email header bore command routing indicators and administrative classification markings consistent with formal inquiry initiation. The subject line was direct. No elaboration, no commentary. Commander Aaron Williams read it once without movement, then again. Captain Benjamin Miller had filed a formal complaint. The allegations were itemized in structured format, disruptive leadership tone, undermining senior authority, encouraging external scrutiny. Each phrase appeared in standardized evaluative language, aligned with command climate policy references. The complaint had been acknowledged by administrative staff and forwarded to the Inspector General in accordance with reporting protocol. Standard procedure. Erin's eyes moved line by line, tracking the documented assertions. Her jaw remained relaxed. Only the faint narrowing of her gaze suggested concentration. She reached for a legal pad positioned at the edge of her desk and wrote the date in block letters at the top margin. There was no immediate response drafted, no call placed, no visible reaction. The IG office receipt confirmation followed within hours. An inquiry had been opened to assess whether further investigation was warranted. The notification included advisory language regarding rights and responsibilities under Department of the Navy regulations. Cooperation was mandatory. Retaliation prohibitions were reiterated. Later that afternoon, Erin reported to the designated legal office for consultation. The judge advocate, general officer assigned to advise her, met her inside a small conference room lined with reference binders and framed directives. The JAG officer's demeanor was measured, voice calibrated to professional neutrality. The complaint summary lay printed on the table between them. Erin sat upright, hands resting flat against her thighs. Her breathing remained steady, shoulders level, as the JAG officer outlined the procedural sequence: preliminary IG assessment, potential witness interviews, document review. Erin nodded once at each transition point. Your response should remain factual, the JAG officer stated. Address each allegation individually. Provide supporting documentation where applicable. Erin's fingers tightened briefly against the fabric of her trousers before releasing. Understood. The JAG officer slid a copy of the formal complaint across the table. Erin reviewed the language again in printed form. The phrases carried familiar construction: broad, evaluative, dependent on interpretation rather than measurable violation. She did not challenge the wording in that room. When the consultation concluded, she returned to her office and closed the door with deliberate care. The overhead light cast a steady white glow across the desk surface. She removed her service coat and hung it precisely along the back of her chair before sitting down. She began assembling documentation. Training records from the CQB qualification were retrieved and organized chronologically. Evaluator comments were highlighted where applicable. The after-action report from the desert humanitarian exercise was printed in full, including operational inject timeline and command directive log. The portion reflecting Commander Sarah Chun's directive during the casualty scenario was underlined in pen. Her keyboard clicks were steady, evenly spaced. She drafted her response in structured paragraphs. Each allegation was addressed with corresponding reference to documented orders, established chain of command, and adherence to authorized instruction. For disruptive leadership tone, she cited direct tasking received over the operations net and her compliance with that directive. For undermining senior authorities, she referenced the recorded order issued by Commander Chun prior to her intervention. For encouraging external scrutiny, she noted the presence of the embedded journalist under public affairs, supervision, and adherence to media engagement policy. No adjectives, no speculation, only sequence. At one point, her hand paused above the keyboard. A pulse beat faintly at her temple. She inhaled once through her nose, held for a count of 3, and resumed typing. When she finished the draft, she read it aloud in a low voice to ensure precision. She removed a single sentence that implied inference and replaced it with a citation to the operations plan annex. Her response packet grew thicker as attachments accumulated. Each document was labeled, each reference cross-indexed. There was no outward display of frustration, no visible anger, only method. Outside her office, routine base operations continued. Footsteps passed along the corridor. Distant voices carried briefly, then faded. Inside, Erin aligned the edges of the assembled pages until they formed a clean stack. She secured them with a binder clip and placed them squarely at the center of her desk. The complaint would proceed through institutional channels. So would her response. She powered down her computer at the end of the duty day without hesitation. Documentation would speak where tone could not. The Inspector General's preliminary inquiry moved forward without public announcement. Requests for records were transmitted through formal channels, routed with precise subject identifiers and case numbers. Administrative personnel complied without commentary, forwarding evaluation reports, complaint histories, and performance memoranda in sealed digital packets. Inside the EG office, analysis followed structured protocol. Allegations were not examined in isolation. Context was required. Patterns, if present, carried evidentiary weight beyond a single incident. Through established cooperation channels between the United States Navy and the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force, a liaison inquiry was initiated. The communication was formal, framed within professional military exchange agreements. It did not request investigative detail. It sought confirmation of prior administrative concerns relevant to command climate assessment. The response returned through diplomatic routing. Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka of the JMSDF had filed an internal complaint in Japan. The allegation concerned Captain Toru Honda's documented pattern of administrative retaliation against female officers under his authority. The liaison communication did not include narrative description. It did not transmit witness statements. It confirmed only the existence of a documented internal complaint and the classification of the matter as administrative retaliation. The phrasing was deliberate. Existence acknowledged, details withheld. Within the IG review matrix, the information was logged as corroborative context, not adjudicated fact. The notation remained restrained. No extrapolation. Separately, the IG analysis of Captain Benjamin Miller's record expanded beyond the present complaint. 10 years of command documentation were reviewed. Performance evaluations, subordinate feedback, prior administrative filings, all indexed and cross-referenced. 16 formal complaints had been filed by Miller against female officers during that period. The number stood alone on the page for several seconds before additional columns were filled in. Each complaint followed a documented professional disagreement or competitive evaluation outcome. In several instances, the complaint had been filed within weeks of a performance review, qualification assessment, or operational dispute. The timing did not constitute proof of retaliation. It constituted sequence. Language comparison was conducted. Phrases repeated with striking consistency across separate filings: cohesion concern, disruptive tone, leadership incompatibility. The wording appeared nearly identical in structure, despite being separated by years and involving different officers. Minor syntactic variations masked a consistent evaluative framework. The terms were subjective, broad enough to suggest behavioral issue without citing measurable misconduct. In institutional review, repetition narrowed coincidence. Inside his office, Miller continued routine command responsibilities while the inquiry progressed. His outward demeanor remained intact, uniform pressed, voice level during briefings. Yet on more than one occasion, his fingers paused mid-page while reviewing paperwork, the tendons along the back of his hand tightening before relaxing again. Captain Honda maintained formal posture during scheduled engagements. His correspondence tone did not change. When notified through liaison channels that contextual review was underway, his reply was succinct and procedural. The muscles along his jaw set once before smoothing into composure. Commander Erin Williams received no direct update regarding the parallel findings. She continued daily operations without visible deviation. Training oversight, personnel counseling, administrative reviews, all executed with the same controlled cadence. If awareness of broader inquiry existed in her posture, it did not surface. Commander Sarah Chun was informed through official chain that the IG review had expanded in scope. Her acknowledgement was a single nod during a closed-door briefing. She asked no speculative questions. Her pen remained poised above her notebook, recording only confirmed information. Within the IG office, the developing matrix of data formed a grid across multiple pages. Names aligned in one column, dates in another. Terminology repeated across rows. Patterns matter in institutional review, not because they presume guilt, because they indicate consistency of behavior. The inquiry had not reached conclusion. No determination had been issued. But the accumulation of documented sequence altered the frame of evaluation. Administrative language, once isolated, now echoed across years. The IG file grew thicker and thicker. The scope of the investigation widened without announcement. The preliminary inquiry had generated sufficient concern to elevate oversight beyond the initial review authority. A formal memorandum reassigned supervisory responsibility to a rear admiral within the operational chain. The notification was concise, citing preservation of institutional integrity and avoidance of perceived conflict of interest. The designation altered the atmosphere, though no one spoke of it openly. Inside the command suite, Captain Benjamin Miller read the notification alone. His office door remained closed. The blinds were angled to filter afternoon light into narrow bands across his desk. He held the printed memorandum between both hands, the paper flexing slightly under his grip before he set it down with deliberate care. His jaw tightened once, a subtle contraction beneath the skin. The muscle near his right eye flickered and stilled. He straightened the stack of documents already aligned before him, edges squared precisely as if control over paper could restore equilibrium elsewhere. Across the Pacific Liaison Channel, Captain Toru Honda received corresponding communication indicating that cooperative review would proceed under flag-level observation. His acknowledgement was transmitted through formal diplomatic phrasing. His posture remained rigid as he read the translated notice, shoulders squared, chin slightly elevated. the knuckles of one hand pressed briefly against the surface of his desk before easing. The Inspector General, now reporting through elevated oversight, initiated expanded document review. Email correspondence between Miller and Honda, preserved within official military servers, was requested under lawful command authority. The retrieval process adhered to established legal protocols governing digital record access. Metadata logs were verified. Chain of custody documentation was completed. Within the collected correspondence, most exchanges reflected routine coordination, training schedules, itinerary adjustments, professional courtesies framed in diplomatic language. One message drew particular attention. The subject line was administrative, the body concise. We need to manage perception before it spreads. Administrative reassignment may prevent precedent. The wording was measured. No overt directive. No explicit acknowledgement of retaliatory motive. Yet the context aligned temporally with the filing of complaints and the desert exercise. The IG reviewers read the sentence more than once. The phrasing was neither emotional nor overtly accusatory. It suggested strategic consideration, containment, redirection, avoidance of escalation. The term prevent precedent lingered in the margin notes of the analysis report. Intent is not declared in bold. It resides between lines. The Rear Admiral overseeing the inquiry reviewed the compiled excerpts in a secured briefing room. His expression remained controlled as pages turned under steady hands. He asked for confirmation of authentication. Were these messages verified through official server logs? The answer was affirmative. Timestamps aligned with operational calendars. No evidence of alteration. The Admiral's pen tapped once against the edge of the table before he placed it flat. There was no declaration made in that room, no pronouncement of conclusion, only a directive to continue. Commander Erin Williams remained outside the circle of elevated review. She received no direct update regarding flag-level oversight. Her daily routine continued unchanged. Training evaluations were conducted on schedule. Administrative reports were filed. Her demeanor did not shift in visible increments. Commander Sarah Chun was briefed that oversight had escalated. She listened without interruption, her gaze steady. When the briefing concluded, she nodded once and dismissed the reporting officer with a measured acknowledgement. Within his office, Miller drafted routine correspondence unrelated to the inquiry. His sentences were structurally precise. Yet once his fingers paused above the keyboard longer than necessary before completing a line. His shoulders lifted slightly with a controlled inhale before settling back into alignment. Honda maintained composure during scheduled engagements. His outward conduct did not deviate from diplomatic protocol. Still, when reviewing official memoranda, his lips pressed thin for a moment before resuming neutral posture. There was no explicit conspiracy outlined in the collected material. No written agreement to retaliate. No admission of coordinated intent. The institutional review does not rely solely on confession. Language carries implication. Sequence provides context. Intent, when inferred from documented communication and consistent pattern, acquires weight. The investigation moved forward under flag-level authority, quiet and procedural. The investigation concluded on the 60th day. The memorandum was clinical in tone, its paragraphs structured with the precision of a charge sheet. Findings were articulated without ornament. Dates, correspondence, evaluative. Language extracted from performance reports. Cross-referenced statements. The administrative record was complete. The reviewing authority documented evidence of a retaliatory administrative pattern. The phrasing was deliberate, not speculative, not accusatory beyond scope, a pattern. In multiple fitness report drafts, language had shifted after protected communications were logged, descriptors softened, recommendations withdrawn. Competitive rankings adjusted downward without documented performance deficiencies. The evaluative narrative, once affirming, carried qualifiers that narrowed opportunity. Words chosen carefully enough to appear procedural, yet consistent enough to reveal alignment. Improper use of evaluative language to suppress subordinate advancement. The line appeared midway through the findings, embedded between citations to applicable Navy regulations and equal opportunity policy directives. It did not accuse motive. It did not editorialize. It described conduct and its administrative effect. Failure to uphold equal opportunity obligations. That sentence stood alone in its paragraph. When Captain Miller received formal notification, he read the document without turning the first page for several seconds. His thumb remained anchored at the margin. A faint muscle along his jaw shifted once, then stilled. His breathing slowed deliberately, measured in even intervals. The office was silent except for the low hum of the ventilation system. Relief of command, pending board of inquiry. The phrase was operationally familiar. He had seen it applied to others over decades of service. Now it bore his name. There was no public spectacle, no escort through corridors, no raised voices. The process unfolded according to instruction. His command was transferred through proper chain of authority. Access credentials were deactivated in sequence. A temporary acting commander assumed responsibilities under existing continuity procedures. The change was administrative, logged in command history as a matter of record. He was not arrested. No charges were filed in criminal court. No law enforcement presence crossed the threshold. He was not publicly disgraced. There was no press release beyond a concise notification of reassignment, no commentary. No speculation issued through official channels. He was removed from leadership. The distinction mattered. Across the Pacific, Captain Honda received recall orders through internal communication within the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force. The directive cited administrative review requirements. The language was formal, restrained, consistent with bilateral protocol. He read the message once, then again, eyes steady. His posture remained upright. Only the brief tightening of his grip on the document suggested calculation behind composure. He acknowledged receipt without delay. Recall to Japan for internal investigation. There was no diplomatic rupture. Liaison offices remained operational. Joint tasking continued uninterrupted. Coordination messages flowed through established channels with professional neutrality. Diplomatic channels remained intact. The consequences unfolded within institutional boundaries. No public denunciations, no retaliatory statements, only process. The investigative summary emphasized adherence to regulation. The equal opportunity provisions cited were specific command responsibility to ensure impartial evaluation, prohibition of reprisal linked to protected communication, obligation to maintain integrity within performance reporting systems. The Board of Inquiry would determine suitability for continued service in a command capacity. Evidence would be presented. Counsel permitted. Findings rendered according to standard. In Miller's quarters, uniform jackets were remained aligned along the rail, ribbons undisturbed. He removed his command pin and placed it carefully into a small case, closing the lid with deliberate pressure from his thumb. The metallic click was soft but definitive. In Tokyo, administrative staff prepared documentation for Honda's internal review. No deviation from procedure. No commentary attached. Professional consequences were applied through proper process. There were no dramatic confrontations. No declarations of victory or defeat. Only documentation, signatures, and the measured cadence of institutions correcting themselves. The investigation's final page bore the reviewing authority's signature block, dated and countersigned. The ink had dried evenly across the paper. Order restored through regulation. There was no ceremony. No formation assembled on a parade field. No commendation read aloud over a podium microphone. No applause. Erin remained at her workstation when the final administrative notices circulated through official channels. The email headers were sterile, subject lines reduced to procedural identifiers. She opened each message without outward reaction. Her cursor hovered briefly before clicking. Her shoulders stayed level, posture aligned as if seated before a board. She did not speak of vindication. She did not request acknowledgement. Senior leadership issued no public tribute. What circulated instead were memoranda referencing completion of review, compliance verification, and procedural closure. The language was consistent with institutional discipline, measured, restrained, impersonal. Yet within closed offices, acknowledgments occurred in quieter forms. A nod sustained half a second longer than customary. A handshake held firm, eyes steady. No praise articulated. Only recognition that mechanisms had functioned as designed. Accountability systems had operated within regulatory boundaries. Documentation had been preserved. Authority had been exercised. Corrective action had followed evidentiary review. Erin read the policy updates weeks later. Mandatory operational recertification for supervisory naval special warfare officers. The directive required formal reassessment of command climate management, performance evaluation standards, and equal opportunity compliance metrics. Recertification would not be ceremonial. It would involve documentation review, scenario-based evaluation, and endorsement from flag-level oversight. Supervisors would sign compliance attestations, acknowledging responsibility under existing uniform code and service regulations. She scanned the paragraph twice, her breathing steady. A faint tightening appeared at the corner of her mouth before fading. It was not satisfaction. It was recognition of structure adjusting under pressure. Revised equal opportunity training within joint exchanges. The updates specified enhanced instruction modules addressing cross-cultural command dynamics, REPORTING protections, and reprisal definitions under federal statute and Department of Defense policy. Joint participants would receive standardized briefings prior to assignment. Attendance would be logged, certification recorded. Erin closed her eyes for a moment, no more than the length of a controlled breath, then reopened them. Her hands remained folded on the desk. Fingertips pressed lightly against each other, knuckles pale before color returned. Oversight review of complaint filing patterns. Data analytics would monitor anomalies in evaluation language following protected communications. Irregular downgrades would trigger secondary review. Documentation trails would be audited periodically by independent authority. Institutional correction, subtle, but real. There were no banners announcing reform. No external declaration of transformation. The changes entered the system as revisions to instruction manuals, amendments to compliance checklists, updates to supervisory qualification matrices. In a conference room months later, Erin observed a briefing slide outlining the new recertification requirements. She did not sit at the head of the table. She did not present. She listened. A senior officer referenced lessons integrated. His tone remained neutral. His hands rested flat on the table's surface, fingers spread slightly as if grounding the statement in the wood beneath. No names were spoken. No incidents cited. The room absorbed the information without commentary. Erin's gaze remained forward. Her jaw set briefly when the slide referenced evaluative language integrity. A muscle beneath her left eye flickered once, then stilled. She made a single notation in her folder, pen moving in deliberate strokes. There was no shift in how she carried herself through corridors. No change in uniform wear. No visible alteration in routine. She continued to execute assigned duties within scope and authority. But processes around her had recalibrated. Supervisory officers submitted to recertification interviews. Training modules expanded in length and specificity. Oversight bodies requested quarterly summaries rather than annual reports. Patterns once buried in administrative texts were now flagged for review. No announcement declared success. Yet the mechanisms, once tested, remained engaged. One afternoon, as Erin reviewed operational planning documents, a brief message from senior leadership appeared in her inbox. It contained no commendation, only a concise line. "Thank you for maintaining procedural integrity." She read it once. Her throat moved as she swallowed. The message was archived without reply. Outside her office, routine continued. Footsteps in corridors, printers cycling through paper, distant voices conducting ordinary coordination. Nothing outwardly signaled alteration. Institutional correction does not arrive with ceremony. It settles into policy, into oversight matrices, into training doctrine. It embeds itself in recertification checklists and audit triggers. It moves quietly, without spectacle. Erin powered down her workstation at the end of the day. Her reflection in the darkened screen appeared steady, composed. She adjusted the crease of her sleeve once, smoothing fabric that required no correction. Accountability had functioned. She stepped into the corridor, posture aligned, expression neutral, carrying no visible sign of what it had required. Months later, Erin stood once more inside the kill house at Naval Base Coronado. The concrete structure absorbed sound and returned it in muted echoes, boots striking plywood thresholds. The metallic click of charging handles cycling forward, controlled breaths behind ballistic eye protection. The air carried the faint scent of carbon residue and cleaning solvent. Light cut through narrow apertures, slicing the interior into hard angles and shadow. She observed the stack forming at the entry point, 4 officers, squared shoulders, muzzles indexed, low ready. Her gaze moved without hurry-trigger discipline, foot placement, spacing intervals. She did not raise her voice. When she corrected, it was with minimal words. Distance. Maintain sector. The lead officer adjusted half a step. His jaw tightened as he recalculated angles. Erin's eyes tracked the correction, then shifted forward. She signaled entry with 2 fingers. The breach flowed clean. No one mentioned the investigation. There were no references to boards, memoranda, or oversight reviews. The training schedule reflected only block numbers and evaluation criteria. Performance metrics were recorded on standardized forms: time to clear, threat discrimination accuracy, communication clarity under simulated stress inoculation. Erin moved along the interior wall, gloved hand brushing textured cinder block as she repositioned. Her expression remained composed. Only a slight narrowing of her eyes marked heightened focus when a trainee hesitated at a threshold. She stepped closer, voice low. "Commit to the room." The officer inhaled, then crossed decisively. The scenario completed without incident. From the observation platform above, a visiting officer from the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force watched in silence. His uniform bore the insignia of his service. His posture remained erect, hands clasped behind his back in formal alignment. He did not interrupt, he did not confer. When the iteration concluded, Erin called a cold debrief inside the structure. Helmets came off, sweat traced controlled lines along temples. She addressed muzzle discipline, cross-coverage timing, the microsecond delay before verbal identification. Her tone was even, clinical. The visiting officer descended the metal stairs after the debrief concluded. His steps were measured, heels contacting each tread with restrained precision. He approached her on the concrete apron outside the structure. He stopped at appropriate distance and inclined his head slightly. "Commander Williams," he said in English. His pronunciation was deliberate, controlled. No interpreter, no intermediary. Erin returned the greeting with a brief nod, shoulders squared. "Captain." The pause that followed was not empty. It held assessment, professional recognition. His eyes remained steady, neither deferential nor guarded. "Your instruction is precise," he said. Thank you for allowing observation. Her jaws shifted once, almost imperceptibly, before settling. You're welcome. There was no fear in his tone. Respect. It was not exaggerated, not performative. It carried the weight of one officer acknowledging another's authority within shared operational standards. He inclined his head again, then stepped back, returning to the observation area without further commentary. Aaron turned toward the Pacific as the final training rotation concluded. The sun lowered beyond the horizon line, casting gold across the water visible past the installation perimeter. The wind carried salt and distant surf. Her silhouette remained upright against the fading light. She removed her protective gloves, flexing her fingers once before sliding them into a cargo pocket. A faint indentation marked the bridge of her nose where eye protection had rested. She adjusted it with 2 fingers, then let her hand fall. The system had not fractured under scrutiny. It had absorbed impact, identified deviation, and recalibrated through regulation and oversight. Corrected, not dismantled. In the military, victory is often recorded in incremental compliance policy amendments, recertification standards, adherence to evaluative integrity. It is measured in restored trust in process, not in spectacle. Aaron stepped through the gate of the compound as the last light settled across Naval Base Coronado. Her pace was unhurried, boots striking pavement in steady cadence. She did not carry herself as someone who had humiliated a superior. There was no trace of triumph in her posture, no visible claim to moral high ground. She had proved that standards apply without exception. Her breathing remained even as she crossed the perimeter road. A vehicle passed, slowing briefly at the checkpoint before continuing. Routine resumed around her, orders issued, rosters updated, training blocks scheduled. Quietly, professionally, relentlessly. If you value stories grounded in discipline, accountability, and the realities of military leadership, consider subscribing to the channel.